we invite Mr. Keith Wakely from Wimbledon. He has 2 questions, please.
Thank you. The Bible tells us, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." What is your interpretation of the pure in heart? And the second one, I read in the Times about 2 weeks ago that a charity was buying slaves' freedom in Sudan. And if I may just read the first paragraph, a British charity working in Sudan is buying back Christian slaves kidnapped by Arab militias and forced to become Muslims. What
they are being forced to become Muslims?
Yes.
By whom?
By the Arab militias.
So I do not subscribe to that
And
forced conversion, and this is why we are made subject of persecution by the mainstream Muslims. We do not subscribe to such views because we consider such views as absolutely against Islamic teachings and against the fundamental teachings of Islam, particularly.
Yes. I rather felt that you would answer like that.
Yes.
But are there any other forms of slavery in Islam or not?
But we'll come to that question in full later on. First, with the first question.
Yes.
The first question was perhaps, what is the meaning of the purity of heart?
Purity of
heart.
Right. Thank you.
You see, the purity of heart is not a religious term belonging to a certain religion or a certain place or a certain area or time. Purity of heart has always been the subject and the most essential subject of discussion of all such faiths which term themselves as religions, even those who do not believe in God or apparently do not believe in God, like Buddhists, like Jainists and some others, who have gone away from, like the philosophies of Taoism, etc. They're also referred to as godless philosophies. Although I disagree with that, that's a different thing altogether. What I mean to say is, as they present religion, the central point is always purification of heart. How can you meet this end? By what means? It is there that the religious teachings differ. Those who believe in God, they also believe that without your coming into some sort of communion with God, purification of heart cannot be achieved. To live with God, to live in God, means that you follow His attributes, such attributes which are within the human capacity to follow and acquire. So this also explains the meaning of man having been created after the nature of God. God has created man ultimately to become good. If the basic fundamental design of man was not good, it would not have been possible for man ever to become good. So the purity of heart is to return to the original design. That is why even those religions who do not believe in God, they somehow acquire this. What they have to do is, they have to delve deeper into their own nature. And they reach the same ultimate end of discovering an innate goodness in all human beings. So they say we have discovered the secret from within us. The religion says, no, in that exercise you may even be misled by your own views and thoughts and cultural influences and the influences of the age, and you may think that you have reached the truth, but it has to be verified from an outer truth, by an outer truth. Without that, there cannot be a certainty regarding your having reached the source of truth or purification. In this regard, Islam has a very clear attitude and very logical and sensible attitude. In fact, you can't do away with it in any form. You have to agree because it's so logical. The founder of Ahmadiyya community, Hazrat Masih Maud has written volumes on this subject, purity of heart. And he has likened it to all human faculties which are all of them dependent on an outer reality which correlates with them. For instance, if the eyes are good and the sight is perfect and healthy, if there is no sun shining, no light coming from the heaven, they can't see. So inner truth is only to the extent of your being capable of receiving the outer truth. The ears can be absolutely healthy and perfect, yet if there is no vibration in the air, no sound, they won't hear anything. Taste, of course we can taste things if we are healthy, but there must be something to create the taste. Empty mouth and empty stomach cannot taste anything. So this is the explanation put forward by Hazrat Masih Maud, the founder of the Ahmadiyya community, in relation to inner truth and outer truth and their interrelationship. So the purity of heart is the sum total of these 5 senses, where they ultimately converge and ultimately create one single entity. If all the 5 senses are pure and healthy, and if they are in communion with the outer sources which are corresponding to them, then the heart is purified, without a shadow of doubt. Without it, it may be on way to purification. It may be innocent. But perfect purification, a purposeful purification cannot be achieved without the meeting together of inner truth and outer truth. That is what we understand by these terms, and I hope this would also be acceptable to many. Thank you. The second question was relating to
slavery and what forms of slavery does Islam have?
You see, Islam, as I have many times before explained, is misunderstood in many regards, also in respect of slavery. The Holy Prophet once said, how can you make a person slave whom God had given birth, whom God had created as a free person? So this is a very important declaration. No man has a right to enslave a person born free. But the matters do not end here. If you have inherited a system of slavery where others had enslaved people, rightfully or wrongfully, and where the society had accepted a form of transfer of this slavery through exchange of commodities or money, etc., then what should be the attitude? That is the second question. Islam did not do away with the inherited institution of slavery with one declaration that free you all your slaves, because that would have done greater damage to the society if it was attempted in one single stroke. Because all the economy of the period was so interwoven with the system of slavery of that time that it would, in the name of goodness, it may ultimately end up in some evil rather than goodness. And what would those slaves do? How would they survive? Who would take care of them? They had no right to be equally treated according to the society around. They would immediately be recaptured by the non-Muslims living around, because as such they had no right to live freely. There were many possible dangers to the slaves themselves, which must have ultimately resulted in this teaching from Allah, that if you do not enslave people without your right to enslave them, this is right. But you must also begin to liberate slaves. And herein is the Quranic teaching, which is incomparable with any other teaching in the world. The ways and means suggested in the Quran and enforced many a time by which slaves could be liberated are so many that it is impossible for these means to be taken seriously and for the society to implement them, and yet slavery to survive within a few generations. It must come to an end. For various small crimes, mistakes, follies, this and that, omissions, the remedy suggested by the Quran is free a slave, liberate a slave. And then the Holy Quran says that the best people in the sight of Allah are those who liberate slaves. So this resulted in a mass movement among the Muslims for the liberation of slaves. And when there was no other means legally to turn the free people into slaves, then automatically slavery must have come to an end. Why it did not was because in many other cases the Muslims of the following generation did not practice Islam. They ignored Islamic injunctions wherever it suited them. And this happens with every society. So the fault lies not with the Quranic teachings, but with those people who took the teaching lightly or misunderstood the teaching. Now, in this regard, I must also point out that the teachings regarding slaves also must be understood according to the Quranic injunctions and the ahadith, that is the traditions or instructions of Hazrat Muhammad himself and his practice. According to Islamic injunctions, the picture which emerges is that if you have a slave, you must treat him with honor, with equality. You must feed him with the food with which you feed your own family. You must dress them in a manner that you dress your own family members. You must not speak harsh words to them. If you strike them, you may earn the wrath of Allah. And the only remedy for this, if you have done it being carried away by your sentiments or passion, anger, is to liberate the slave. Now, this was done so repeatedly and consistently by Hazrat Muhammad that there are many an example where a slave committed a mistake and somebody lost his temper and struck him. And once it happened many times, but it so happened that Muhammad himself was coming in the direction of the person who was striking his slave. Not viciously to the degree that he could have broken his legs or things, but he struck at him. And Hazrat Muhammad shouted, he didn't shout normally, but raised his voice and said, Abu Masood, Abu Masood. Oh, what is happening? He understood the tone of urgency and displeasure. And he turned and he paled at seeing his impression. He said, O Prophet of Allah, I liberate this slave immediately now. He said, had you not done this, you had earned hell. So the attitude towards slaves is also so important that the slavery does not become as heinous to look at if the slavery is practiced in the short term that it is practiced, should be practiced in Islam, according to the instructions of the Holy Quran. And the love that was generated because of this teaching between slave and the master was so intense sometimes that given the opportunity of a liberation, the slaves themselves would reject to benefit from that. It particularly happened in the case of Hazrat Muhammad.'s own slave, Zaid. His parents were some nobles from perhaps Persia or some other country, who had lost their son, and they didn't know much about him, where he had gone and disappeared. When the fame of Islam spread far and wide, they heard the name of their own son mentioned in relation to the Holy Prophet. So they ultimately approached him and said, "You claim to be the Prophet of Allah. We have come here not to accept Islam, but to claim what belongs to us, our son." So he said, "Yes, he's yours for the taking. No problem." He called Zaid and said, "Here are your parents, and I, with all with all my heart, I permit you, without any reservation, to go with them and return to your home and your own land." He looked up at him, said, "O Prophet of Allah, not after I have known you. It's impossible." Turned to his parents and said, "I know your parents, I respect and love you, but I love him more." So it was the slavery of love which had been transformed from the slavery of a cruel form, against which no human can really take an exception. So if you read the true teachings of the Holy Quran regarding slavery, then it does not appear to be such an heinous thing as normally it is related to. Now, things have changed, I know. There is still slavery practiced in Saudi Arabia and some other Muslim countries, most unfortunately, because they exploit the poverty of some poor nations. And they think, which we consider absolutely wrong, that if they go to India, to Madras, some other backward countries parts of India, where even the parents of a poor child are compelled to sell that child for the sake of economic necessity. At least, if not for their own sake, for the sake of the child itself, because they know he would be better fed outside and better clad outside. So they sell and they buy them. But the interesting thing is that except for a few cases in Sheikhdom, most often in Saudi Arabia, the slaves are treated with such equality that those Ahmadis which have been there, which have been moving in and out of the palaces of the princes, they have borne witness to me that we have seen the slaves to be clad like them, to be sitting on the same sofas, sharing the same style of life, so much that sometimes it was very difficult for us to find which was the master and which was the slave. Bad as it may be, but not as bad as slavery has been practiced elsewhere in the world. Particularly, as I've mentioned, the earlier periods of slavery, forced enslavement of people of Africa, and the tortures they suffered. And despite the fact that there is no slavery in America, no legality in slavery, yet the blacks are treated even worse than slaves. Somehow, very cleverly, they're kept at a third or fourth rate level, and they're rotting in slums, and there's no hope for their rise to the equal level with the whites. So this is unwritten slavery, but much more heinous than the slavery practiced in Saudi Arabia, for instance, because a whole people have lost the purpose, direction, the end product of their life. And that is why, with people like Farah Khan and so on, they are capable of gathering even 1 million people by way of protest. They're misled, I know. When I go there, I meet the leadership and I tell them this is no way of liberating yourself. The best way is to liberate yourself from the evils and ills of the society. Liberate yourself from the crime. Then none could keep you suppressed because there is no legal instrument here by which you could be suppressed if you benefit from the options and possibilities of such gateways as are open to all, provided you behave well, provided you offer sacrifices, provided you get education and emphasize the role of morality. Then no society on earth can keep you suppressed. This is my message against the message of Farah Khan. But unfortunately, people want excitement and want cheap and shortcuts to success. And there is no cheap and short cut to success. So this is all I could say here at this moment, please. I know your deep interest, your dedication to the purpose of liberating slaves and doing away with the slavery, whether it is apparent or subdued. Am I right? Thank you. Thank you.
Eid Mubarak Eid, Eid Mubarak Eid, Eid Mubarak Eid, Eid Mubarak Eid.
27 tuntutan Tahrik Jadid. 1. Hidup secara sederhana. 2. Ikut serta dalam penyiaran agama Islam di seluruh dunia. 3. Mendedikasikan masa-masa cuti untuk pelayanan jemaat. 4. Anggota agar mengabdikan dirinya untuk kepentingan Islam dan Ahmadiyah. 5. Mendedikasikan masa libur musiman untuk pelayanan jemaat. 6. Mewakafkan anak-anak kalian untuk seumur hidup. 7. Para pensiunan agar menyediakan diri untuk melayani jemaat. 8. Mendedikasikan sebagian dari penghasilan dan kekayaan kalian. 9. Para Ahmadi terpelajar dan berpengaruh agar memberikan kuliah-kuliah. 10. Menyiapkan sanggahan atas propaganda yang memusuhi. 11. Simpan uang lebih kalian di dana amanah Tahrik Jadid. 12. Tahrik Jadid agar membentuk dana cadangan tetap. 13. Kirimkan anak-anak kalian ke markas untuk pendidikan dan tarbiyat. 14. Minta saran dari jemaat saat memutuskan tentang pendidikan yang lebih tinggi dan masa depan anak-anak kalian. 15. Biasakan bekerja sendiri dan tidak tergantung pada orang lain. 16. Mereka yang menganggur, jika memungkinkan agar pergi ke luar negeri, di sana mereka bisa mencari penghidupan dan menyiarkan ajaran Islam dan Ahmadiyah. 17. Mereka yang menganggur, jangan ragu dalam menerima pekerjaan sekecil apapun. 18. Kembangkan kebudayaan Islam. 19. Kembangkan perilaku kejujuran di dalam masyarakat. 20. Jagalah kebersihan jalan. 21. Lindungi hak-hak kaum wanita. 22. Bentuk perkumpulan seperti Hilful Fudul. 23. Bentuk Darul Qada Ahmadiyah dan mematuhi keputusannya. 24. Jika memungkinkan, para anggota hendaknya membangun rumah di markas. 25. Keluarkanlah pengorbanan uang untuk program tablik khusus. 26. Para anggota hendaknya pergi ke berbagai negeri yang ia suka, menggunakan sepeda dan lakukan survei untuk prospek tablik. 27. Memanjatkan doa khusus agar usaha-usaha ini berhasil.
एक दफ़ा किसी ने मुस्लिमों को शिकायत की कि मातहत हमें सलाम नहीं करते, یا چھوٹے جو ہیں وہ بڑوں کو سلام نہیں کرتے. اس پر آپ نے یہ نصیحت فرمائی کہ سلام کرنے کا حکم دونوں کے لیے یکساں ہے، ایک جیسا. میں نے حضرت مسیح موعود علیہ السلام سے، حضرت مسلم موعود کہتے ہیں کہ میں نے حضرت مسیح موعود علیہ السلام سے ایک شعر سنا ہوا ہے کہ وہ نہ آئے تو تو چل اے امیر، وہ نہ آئے تو تو چل اے امیر، تیری کیا اس میں شان گھٹتی ہے. فرماتے ہیں کہ اگر رسول کریم صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم کا حکم ایک بھائی نہیں مانتا تو کیوں نہ ہم خود اس پر عمل کر لیں. بس اگر شکایت درست ہے تو یہ فعل عقل کے خلاف اور اخلاق سے گرا ہوا ہے. یہ کہیں حکم نہیں کہ سلام صرف چھوٹا کرے، بڑا نہ کرے.
اے عظیم Indonesia, jayalah. Indonesia.